Hey everyone, welcome to the Knights of Last Call. My name is Derek Melenda. What you're about to watch is a recent clip from a Daggerheart Livestream where we gave advice to first-time GMs who may need a little help with running Daggerheart. Enjoy. Topic the first is understanding what Daggerheart isn't, right? What is Daggerheart not? And this really came up to me during the Draw Steel streams, where Draw Steel did a really great job of highlighting what this game is not about, and even gave suggestions about going and playing other games if you wanted to engage in those sort of activities. Now, like all game systems, Daggerheart can be bent or broken in certain places, but ultimately, there is a core ethos to the game, and the further and further you go astray from that, the more and more difficulty you're going to encounter. So I really want to sort of focus on what Daggerheart is not, and understand why you may not want to play Daggerheart, or why Daggerheart may not be right for you. What is Daggerheart not? So Daggerheart is not just D&D with some narrative tokens, okay? I fundamentally believe that games like Dungeons and Dragons and games like Pathfinder 2, and to a certain extent, even games like Draw Steel, are fundamentally based around this idea of campaign as a competition. Now, it may not seem that way, and not everybody uses the mechanics for that, but the game itself is built around this idea of the dungeon master or the game master setting a series of challenges that are sort of codified and balanced within the context of the system. The players then go and try to defeat those challenges so that they can overcome their goals, so they can achieve their goals. So that fundamental construct places the game master and the dungeon master sort of in a role of, my job here is to provide a challenge, to make this a difficult process. Now, the games have done a lot of lifting over the years to try to make it so that the players feel like they're challenged, but they're not actually being challenged. But I'm going to go out here and say that Daggerheart is not that. It is built fundamentally for narrative and emotional storytelling. The duality dice system is first and foremost designed to guide your characters through character arcs. The whole game is based around this idea of not will we achieve our victories, but how. So Daggerheart is not, it's not designed for that. It's not about tactical precision. It is not about grid-based combat. It is not about hard balance. And while I'm not going to tell you to completely ignore the rules of the game, I find that even some of the fiddliness, like with the range ruler, I see a lot of people on Reddit, well-intentioned, they're making these range rulers, very close, far. I think those are fine. I think using miniatures is fine. I'm probably going to use miniatures myself. But I think that can distract you from what the focus and the emphasis is on. And I want people to realize that this is not about creating a tactically rich, rewarding, challenge-based experience. I've seen a lot of people on Reddit complain about, my Guardian used their class feature and they became unstoppable. There was no way for me to challenge them. Yes. Think about your average D&D game and Pathfinder 2 game. How often do your players lose? The answer is very rarely. And that is supposed to be a game that is challenge-based. Daggerheart is not that game. Those aren't the stakes that we are going up against. If you want a game that's really going to push your players to sort of min-max, car op, have to really rack their brains and think hard, this is probably not the best game for it. Now, Daggerheart is a great game because it gives us these fun little tools and these fun little toys and fun little levers that we can play with, but it is not about that kind of precision. The same thing is about initiative order and the lack thereof. This isn't necessarily a game that is about complete and total fairness and balance in every single situation and in every single encounter. I've talked before that there may be a combat where one particular character has a lot more at stake than the other characters. You can bet your ass that that character is going to get more spotlight time from me as the game master than they would maybe in another fight or another encounter, because this is about them. So you can't think of it in terms of initiative order. You need to think in terms of the lens of a director. You need to think about it in terms of a storyteller. This is a game about bringing these narrative arcs to life. But instead of it being pre-written, we're figuring it out and we're playing it together and we're discovering it together. So if Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder 2 at their fundamental base are a game that is a question of about there are great problems, terrible evils in the world. And the question posed by the game is, will the characters be able to succeed, right? Can our characters stop the great evil? Now, that is technically the premise that is assumed, right? That we go into that game, the players believing that if they don't play right or if they don't play well enough, right, that they can lose and that the game master will win, right? And that's what I mean by campaign as competition. Now, we all know that, again, these games are fairly tightly balanced, especially nowadays, modern games, so that actually doesn't really happen that often. And then even in situations where it might happen, we have a lot of stories on Reddit of people and YouTube of people saying, well, that's why I fudge, right? Because I don't want my players to lose. I want my players to win. So the game itself is built around this fundamental premise of, can the players win? Will the players win? If the players win? I believe that Daggerheart isn't that game. It's not a question of winning or losing. It's more of a question of, how will this experience change the characters? Maybe the fact that the characters are going to win is a given. The system is, I mean, look, right off the bat, the characters can't die. They can always avoid death. If nothing else should convince you that this game isn't about winning or losing, it should be that characters, if they, get taken out and killed, they can go, I'll avoid death. I'm going to choose to avoid death. Hell, as a GM, you could pour all of your efforts into trying to kill a character, and then they might go, you know what, I'm going to risk it all. And they roll a 10 on the hope and a 2 on the fear, and suddenly they're back in the fight with max hit points and no, with all their hit points and all their stress clear. So clearly, balance and the question of can the players overcome this challenge is irrelevant. What's really at stake here is, how will the characters change? What sacrifices are they willing to make in order to achieve their goals? How will you challenge their beliefs? Can they maintain and keep up with their beliefs despite the challenges and the adversities being thrown before them? What prices will they pay in order to achieve their goals? What compromises are they willing to make? And we learn about those characters and we discover the story of those characters together. It's not pre-written. We discover it together. The dice help guide that story. So it is essentially a storytelling game in that kind of weird, wonky narrative sense. It still uses these mechanical concepts like hit points and armor class, and your character can still, quote unquote, die by going to 0 hit points. But because of the mechanics like fear and because of the mechanics like avoid death, those consequences are very much mitigated in a way that our traditional D20 fantasies don't. So really thinking about how can I make the fight harder, you might put all this effort into making the fight harder. You succeed, I guess, in wiping out the characters, and then they might all choose to avoid death. And so what was really the point of that? It sounds like you were just taking control of the situation and control of the narrative. You need to be more freeing and more open to experiences than that. There isn't all of the systems, the mechanics, the resources, the character choices. They are framed through drama and fiction, not math and not balance. It values this idea of the fiction. When we refer to the fiction, we refer to the world in which our characters are inhabiting. But there's also another element. See, if we were playing a very fully simulationist game, we would be worried about the fiction. And you might say, oh, wait, fiction, doesn't that have to do with like narrative and storytelling and arcs? No. When PBTA style and PBTA adjacent games talk about the fiction, what they mean is, what is the world in which our characters are inhabiting? How does it work? If I light a bridge on fire, then the bridge should probably burn down unless someone puts it out. And when the players come back there a couple weeks later, maybe the bridge is still destroyed, or maybe the town has started a new project to rebuild the bridge, and they're very mad at the players because they wantonly destroyed the bridge in their fight and they were throwing fireballs around when they shouldn't have been, or something like that nature, right? The world has this sort of internal consistency. So that's the fiction. And believe it or not, that is really important to simulation style games, to verisimilitude, right? To the suspension of disbelief. Daggerheart has that. It calls itself a fiction first game, and you should respect that. But that term is a little bit misleading because Daggerheart has another pillar. And the other pillar is narrativism. Daggerheart wants you to make decisions that not only respect the fiction, but fill the characters' lives with excitement and adventure and danger. You want to make sure that things don't literally seem like they're Deus Ex Machina and, things are dropping out of the skies just in order to, ratchet up the tension and ratchet up the stress. But make no mistake, as a game master, your job is to create high drama. Your job is to create high stakes. As a player, your job is to embrace that. Your job isn't to try to make the situation automatic and easy. You want to create conflicted characters, tense moments, dramatic moments. And you should be leaning into that, not trying to avoid that, and certainly not trying to optimize your way out of it. And we'll get into some of these and some of the later tips and hints. But I think fundamentally reframing this is a way of contextualizing it. I think a lot of players and a lot of GMs think about RPGs as winning. Am I winning or am I losing? Some players think my job is to win. Some GMs think their job is to win. I guess that's pretty bad. But most GMs think it's their job to lose. And you shouldn't be thinking in terms of winning or losing or planning tightly and trying to keep things in a specific. You should just react. What is happening? What is going on? What is the logical step that follows? Make the move that follows. That's I don't know if it's in Daggerheart, but it's in PBTA. Make the move that follows and do it with a mindset of respecting the reality that you guys the shared reality that you're creating, but also do it with a mind towards creating excitement, adventure, magic, drama, tension, emotional investment. Make it funny, make it endearing, make it revolting, but create these sort of moments that your players can react to. You might not be able to control how your players react, but you can at least try to create situations that will give them something to really ponder about. And so ultimately, I really want to highlight that Daggerheart is not, even though you might be playing your D&D game and you're trying to lean into that style of play, realize that the system at its forefront is a game, in my opinion, about winning and losing. They may have changed the math a lot since 1974, and they've really tried to create a lot of, we'll call them safety nets, right? Death saving throws and 3 death saving, you die, but no, you're not dead. You have to fail 3 death saving throws, right? They've added all these layers on top of the game to try to keep it so that it's harder to die. But the fact of the matter is you can. And players have really become very triggered to that. And a lot of times a TPK or something to that nature can end a campaign. And it is I respect the hell out of GMs who really struggle with this issue because they feel like their job is to push the players, to challenge the players, especially in the combat mode of their game. But they also know in the back of their mind, or maybe even at the forefront, that if I do succeed at killing these players, I may destroy my game with it. That's a very tough tightrope to walk. And it's a reason why I think so many GMs embrace fudging. So the last thing I'm going to say on this topic is this is a game where you absolutely have no reason to fudge. This is not that game. This is a game where you can do all of your fudging out in front of the screen and really just let people see what's going on. And we'll talk about this when we get into the topic about, learning to love failure. But when your players realize that it's not about winning and losing, and it's going to take time. It's going to take time. But slowly but surely, you need to rebuild that trust so that the players can feel that they are in a place where they can express themselves, and it's not about feeling like they need to perform at a certain level or the entire campaign may end. And maybe it's their fault because they chose the wrong spell or they didn't take a feat that they were supposed to take. So Daggerheart is really about exploring that space and being more interested in storytelling than it is winning. So that's what I have to say about understanding what Daggerheart isn't. And for context on that, Daggerheart goes into great detail about what it is, but I really want to highlight what it's not. And Draw Steel did a great job of this, and I really wanted to highlight that as well.